A relief for Shin Tae-yong is at least these young players who are now into the third game of the tournament, they have matured, they have learned a lot, and they now fully understand what is needed to play in senior international football. In tournament football as it goes, you win some, you lose some. And for the young Indonesians tonight, it was a painful lesson in tournament management as they played well defensively, but only to succumb to a late goal by Nguyen Quang to succumb to a 0-1 away defeat to Vietnam in their third ASEAN Championship match, Group B encounter. It was quite painful and heart-wrenching to see this defeat, especially when Indonesia, for the large part, they actually set up their tactical plan and executed them well. In spite of this, the relative inexperience of these young Garudas, they handled the situation very admirably. And unlike the first two games where the defenders were all over the place and where holes were open to allow their opponents to cause some trouble in their defensive third, for much of the game, especially in the first half, the young Garudas kept things compact in their defensive third, frustrated the Vietnamese, and kept the Vietnamese largely at bay with their, you can say, for their youth, their immaculate defensive positioning and concentration. They did not stray from their respective roles where they are which zone they were supposed to cover and where they were supposed to be positioned, or which Vietnamese player they were supposed to be marking. And that make the likes of Quang, Nguyen Tien Lin, and the others Vietnamese midfielders and forwards very quiet in the first 45 minutes. Ultimately, Indonesia do gain some confidence to venture to make ray forays into the Vietnamese South and into the Vietnamese final third. And before that sucker punch in the 77th minute, Indonesia were already giving Vietnam quite a number of problems, especially halftime substitute Victor Dehan causing a lot of problems on the right side. Well, in the 66th minute, he actually combined well, doing a 1-2 with a first sub Rafael Strick to burst into the box, only to be swamped out by a sea of red shirts and the defender to force a corner. And a few minutes later on, in the 69th minute, he burst past the Vietnamese offside trap to cut in from the right into the box, only to be thwarted by the Vietnamese goalkeeper. And that was unfortunately as good as it got for the Garudas tonight. Once Vietnam got that goal, where they had that earlier shot that hit the crossbar from outside the box, and when Tien Lin laid up for Quang, who otherwise had a very quiet game, to smash home the winner, you can tell the devastation in those young Garudas' faces. The devastation that led them to struggle for the rest of the game as Vietnam gained the upper hand and momentum. It totally broke because it was like they were holding out very well, apart from one or two situations where maybe the referee could have gone against them. But they were fortunate in the first half where a push saw an overreaction by Vietnamese striker, but where the home side were denied a penalty. but they could only get away for this much for this long. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of concentration, and being at the right place at the right time to snuff out, and how to react against more experienced opponents who are looking for that one opportunity to break through, to cut, to create that one cutting edge that would break the Indonesian hearts. And that happened in the just into the final quarter of the game. It was a well taken goal, but the manner in which the goal was conceded, rather the timing, really devastated them, because the Indonesian backline was not the same thereafter. In fact, when it comes, unlike the first two games, once again Shin Tae-yong gave a few new faces runs up. In particular, one enforced change because Marcelino Ferdinand was suspended after his red card against Laos, and it was quite obvious that without their talismanic midfielder, there was a little struggle in them trying to go forward. For in the first half, the young Garudas had only 26% of possession. They defended well as a collective, but moving forward was a challenge. They had no one to pull the strings. And Rivaldo, yes. Let me see. Rivaldo Pakpahan, who was making his international debut in this game, he had to be subbed off 7 minutes before the end of the first half due to injury, which was a real pity. He was holding very well as the midfield anchor in front of the centre-back trio, and aided by the two wing-backs who were more in situ in the defensive side, covering the width, covering inside the box, and denying the Vietnamese space and time to try to tear them apart with their discipline. Overall, for the young Garudas, their game plan was excellent. It was similar to the approach that they had the senior Garudas had been doing against the senior Garudas had actually been doing in the final of World Cup qualifiers so far. And as such, it's like you can see the repeat of the plan, the discipline that it required for them to hold out against more experienced, stronger opponents. Yes, it's rather lopsided considering this is their fourth meeting between Indonesia and Vietnam this year, and Indonesia having previously all three previous meetings in the Asian Cup finals in January and the double header in the second round of World Cup Asian qualifying in March. I mean, they won all the games, 1-0 in the Asian Cup, the home leg 1-0, and the away leg in Hanoi 3-0 without conceding a single goal. Obviously, they were aided by the more senior Garudas and also the naturalized players who added the quality and the depth into the squad. But with these young Garudas who played their hearts out today, who played the plan to perfection, and you can say in spite of the defeat, it gives them some optimism in how they can perform when they face similar situations in the future. It is a harsh reality that these young Garudas will have to face when it comes to tournament football. It doesn't matter how well you play sometimes. Sometimes it's the final result that matters. And sometimes it's how you respond to a setback like conceding the goal from behind. And against a much better opponent than Myanmar and Laos in the ASEAN Championship in the group stage, that really counts. And thus, with 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss after 3 matches in Group B, Indonesia now, the young Garudas have only 1 more game to play before they wrap up the group stage. Although they remain second in the group despite the defeat, and considering the level of opposition from Myanmar, Laos, and the Philippines, they are still in a relatively good position to advance into the next round as the best, as the group runners up. But how Shinteo is going to get these young Garudas to lift them up, to encourage them, to motivate them to play the next game with that same level of discipline, combined with the attacking flash shown in the Laos game. Although one concern remains, Indonesia still has not yet scored a goal from open play. Although Victor Dehan came really close in this match, that is a huge problem that they still need to solve. A relief for Shin Tae-yong is at least these young players who are now into the third game of the tournament, they have matured, they have learnt a lot, and they now fully understand what is needed to play in senior international football. So with at least 4 or 5 days to prepare for their final group game at home against the Philippines in Sukatra, there are things to take away from the Vietnam defeat, and the lessons to take away from all 3 games where Indonesia had been admittedly erratic due to inexperience, due to, you can say, the young players who had not been kept before being overall at the big stage, and where the young seniors had relatively underwhelmed so far in spite of their experience, especially from Marcelino Ferdinand, who was so brilliant in the World Cup qualifiers but was rather anonymous in his first 2 games for the young Garudas. How they play in the final group game against a new look Philippine side will be an indicator not just on the tournament progress for the ASEAN Championship, but also an indicator on how many of these young players who have been blooded into this tournament will continue their Garuda's journey when the World Cup qualifiers resume.